Okay, we're going to go over the section that you guys just read about classification and taxonomy. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think there's some valuable information here that'll help. So what is classification? We classify things all the time. So it's when we divide up organisms, in this case, into groups or classes. And we use characteristics to do that. And this helps scientists be able to answer some questions about kind of where things fit. Now, if we were in school, we'd be able to throw some M&Ms on our desk or some Halloween candy because it's around Halloween, and I would ask you to separate it. Or I might say to you, how do you do certain things in your life? So stay tuned. We might even do that. But the idea is that we classify things all the time. And just because there's this fancy way of doing it that scientists use, it doesn't mean that we don't do it every day in our own lives. So the study or the science of describing, naming, and classifying organisms is called taxonomy. So there are what we call taxonomists in the world, and they have the job of doing this. And they use an 8-level system that we're going to talk about to be able to put animals and plants and other organisms that we can't even see into groups, okay? So that's kind of where we're going to take the rest of the year. We're going to start studying living things in their different groups, all right? So we have these levels of classification, and it starts out with very, very large kingdoms, right? So your book will tell you, which you don't have in front of you, but if you had it in front of you, you would see that your book talks about 6 kingdoms. I say there are 5. And the reason I say there are 5 is because I group bacteria. There are 2 main groups of bacteria that are very different, so they put them into 2 different kingdoms. And so I say 5 because there are 2 groups of bacteria, and your book says 6. So there are protists, which we're going to learn about first, and then we have fungi and plants and animals, and then we have the bacteria that fit into those 2 groups according to your book. So those are kingdoms. Those are the very largest groups. And as we move our way down, we come all the way down to the very smallest, and that is the species. Now, if we remember this, it gets smaller along the way, and I'll show you an example in a minute from your book. But the idea is the very smallest group that you can be put into is a species. So for example, the genus and species for us humans is what we call Homo sapiens. We've been talking about various hominids, right? And we are in fact Homo sapiens. And so that would give you an example. We are in kingdom Animalia, or the animal kingdom, it's Latin. But if we break it all the way down, which we will, our genus and species are Homo sapiens. So that gives you an idea of how that works. So Linnaeus was a guy who came up with this 2-part naming system, like Homo sapiens, right? He said there's a genus and a species. So that's the example we would give. Now, this is a picture right out of your book, and it took up 2 pages. So I kind of combined it here and copied and pasted. So if we look to the left, as I said, these are Latin. Animal kingdom is Animalia, right? So the biggest kingdom that we're in is the animal kingdom. And you can see us with a bunch of different other animals, including insects, birds, and so on. Then we're in the phylum Chordata. We are chordates. We are in this phylum with fish. And as I said earlier on, if we look at, for example, the spine or the vertebrae of a fish and a human in early development, you probably wouldn't even be able to tell the difference. So we continue to look very similar for quite some time. Then we are, of course, in the class of mammals. So you start to see things being kind of black and white here and kind of fading away. So we're still following, actually we're following a house cat right now, not the human, but you'll see the human disappear right here into the order of Carnivora. So we are not carnivores. We are now out of this group. And then family would be Felidae. Again, we're watching this cat right here. Everything else is starting to disappear. Then the genus is Felis, and the species is Domesticus. So it's a domestic cat, essentially. That's the famous name, or the fancy way that we would say the formal name for domestic cat is Felis domesticus, right? So you can see everything else disappeared. So it was very large and it went to smaller, okay? So that's kind of how taxonomists do their job. So that gives you an idea of how that works. The other piece they use, and this is kind of neat, are what we call dichotomous keys. So I don't know if any of you guys have ever read a Choose Your Own Adventure book, but it reminds me of those. I used to read those when I was your age or a little bit younger. And what you do is you ask questions. So if we had more time, we might be able to work through a dichotomous key where if they have an organism that they don't know where it fits, and even you right now might say, well, why does this organism fit here or there as we go through this? And if we look at their characteristics, they fit more into one group eventually. So for example, if we're looking at identifying an organism, the first question is, this mammal flies, its hands form a wing, so it's a little brown bat. But this mammal doesn't fly. If it doesn't fly and its hand doesn't form a wing, we have to go to step 2. Then when we get to step 2, we skip around and we eventually can name the organism. So that's just the basics of it, but it is kind of neat to take a look at. So we'll come back together now.